Hey everybody, Steve C here from the On the Scene family, and today we are honored to be talking to Caseen Gaines, who a legendary author. I mean, I've got your Pee-wee's Playhouse book, your Back to the Future book. To catch
Dark
up on.
Crystal is a Christmas story. Yeah, I've been a busy boy.
You have been very excited about your new book. It is the E.T. Extra Terrestrial Ultimate Visual History. It is the there we go. We're matching 40th anniversary book, and what a perfect book. What I love about this, and it's just packed. It is you did not skimp out. I mean, there are pictures, there are interviews, there are. I love the recreations of the scripts and the press passes for the set and just the drawings that they did. An amazing book. What inspired you to put this together? Is it a connection to ET? Is it just just because of the anniversary you thought it might be fun? Like what is your personal connection to ET? I'm gonna stop talking.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, that's the thing with ET is that everyone has an ET story. For me, I actually was a little bit too young to see it in theaters, but I was just the perfect age to be around when the VHS came out. And I remember very distinctly, I don't know if you remember, Steve, but it was a regular black VHS tape, but it had a green tab. And I remember that being so unique and so different, and I had no idea what it was. I remember pulling it out of the sleeve and just being mesmerized by the image of E.T. and Elliot, going across the face of the moon, of course, not knowing really what I was looking at the
Right.
time. And it's funny because the first time I saw E.T., I it's so fantastic in a lot of ways, but because it's so grounded and so intimate, I didn't. I don't know if I totally thought that ET was a puppet. I don't know if I had that realization as a kid. I think it just felt so real to me, especially that not the very opening scene, but that opening scene where we meet Elliot and his family, and they're around the table, and the friends are over, and they're playing a D&D style game. But that just to me reminded me of when my family convened, when my friends were over, what the dynamic was like. It was the kitchen was a little bit messy. It wasn't like a perfect looking house. And everything just sort of felt so real to me. So I was immediately drawn in. And if I'm being honest, probably a little bit afraid in the very beginning of the movie, until I kind of went on the same emotional roller coaster that Elliot went on and warmed up to ET and was really sad when the movie ended, just like Elliot is really sad when ET goes home. Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen it, anyone who's
Right.
been living under a rock for the last 40 years.
Right.
But in terms of book, I did a book on the Dark Crystal that I worked on with Inside Editions, great publisher, and the Jim Henson Company. And when that was done, there were a couple of other projects that were percolating, and I had various levels of interest in all of them. And then my editor was like, "Oh, by the way, we also have this like really long shot project that we're looking at, and we're not sure if it's going to materialize. But if you want to just wait for it, it's an ET book." And I was like, "Yeah, I'll wait." And it was very kind of touch and go for a little bit, but ultimately it was an amazing thing to work on. And when I say touch and go, I mean in terms of whether or not the project was going to happen, because it was really just in the conceptual stages when I learned about it. And I said, I just want to wait for it. and I put in for it, and ultimately was granted the green light by everyone at Amblin to write it. And so I'm so incredibly thankful for that.
Wow, and the wait was worth it because I mean it is so chock full of stuff, and it is there's stuff in there that like I think anybody in the past 40 years, if you've loved ET, you've read about ET, you've seen shows and specials about ET, you will be blown away because there is so much more intimate details and stories and just images that like, as if you are an ET fan, you're going to be like, wow, it's like it brings back those feelings, it brings back the energy, the excitement. I saw it in the theaters. I remember crying when ET was dying, and crying into my mom's lap because I couldn't believe he was dying. I mean, there was that the movie was so emotional on so many different levels, but it did play into, you're right, just being a normal kind of family, and coincidentally enough, I lived in Tahunga.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, before we moved to Connecticut last year, and I was a mile away from the ET house.
Wow.
So I had actually taken this guy here, and we actually took some pictures in front of the ET house.
I think
My
I've
son
seen
and
those
I.
pictures actually. I think I've seen
Yeah.
some of those.
Yeah. So that was really fun to just to be that close and to to be part of even closer to ET. You could tell I love ET. I've got another box full of stuff I couldn't find in time for this interview of ET things.
Can I say, Steve, actually, to your point about when you were a kid and you were, crying when ET died? This is a true story. Just maybe a couple weeks ago, I was at a screening of ET, and I was going to introduce the film, and then afterwards we were going to do a Q&A about the film. And I thought to myself, like, I've seen it a million times at this point. Like, I'm going to, go grab something to eat. I'll come back and do the Q&A. And I came back, maybe about a half hour before the end of the film. And when ET starts to die, and especially during the goodbye scene, I started to cry again in the theater, thinking, like I'm desensitized to the magic of ET, by this
Right.
point. And it just got me. And then I'm like, I have to do this Q&A, and I'm there trying to wipe away my tears, But there's something about, we all have that experience of having whether it's a friend, a family member, someone comes to visit, you have a great time with them, you don't want them to go, you have such a strong connection with them, and also falling in love, not necessarily romantic love, but falling in love with or developing a connection with someone that maybe you had no expectation that you were going to have a connection with, and that can be so surprising and so captivating and so arresting as well. And then to have to separate and go your own way, I mean, that's still hard for me, even as an adult. It's the kind of lesson of ET, and what ET causes me to reflect on, I think still is just as strong 40 years after its debut.
Yeah, I mean, it really, friendship, I think, is the core. Because I mean, I know I feel when my friends go away, it's like that bond, and he made a close friend, and it was something clearly out of this world. Now, let me ask you: in the writing of this, was there some like really key information, or like a moment or something that like when you were like, oh my gosh, this is like awesome, like the jackpot of like a really cool story that maybe no one's heard for 40 years?
Yeah, I think there were maybe two things that sort of jumped out. The first thing was the audition process for all of the cast members was very unique and different, actually, for all of them. Talking to like Rob McNaughton, talking to some of Sean Fry, who's one of the bike riders, one of Michael's friends in the film. Like listening to their audition process was sort of fascinating. But I think the biggest one is certainly Henry Thomas for Elliot. And also there was another actor who was very close to being cast as Elliot. So, you mentioned before I wrote a book on Back to the Future. And so if you're a Back to the Future fan, as I know you are, Eric Stoltz obviously filmed for several weeks and then got the axe. But in this case, there was another actor who wasn't just being considered, but was like really close to being Elliot, and it just wasn't right. And Spielberg sort of delayed the start of the picture just in the hopes that they could maybe, find someone else just to see if they could get it right. Wow. So that was kind of a fascinating story, because some of the actors actually auditioned and got far along in the process with that other person. And I spoke with some of the casting directors. In fact, I think I spoke to all of the casting directors, including the late, great Mike Fenton before he passed away, for this book. But the other thing that was really fascinating for me is I did speak with Steven Spielberg. And one of the things that I asked him was, if ET, so much of art is about time and place, of course. If ET were released today, do you think the film would have the same impact that it had 40 years ago? And I was amazed to hear him say no, actually, and his reasoning was, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, but his full words are in the book. His reasoning was that, in the 80s, rightfully or wrongfully, people were blind to a lot of injustice. It was very sort of in vogue to say that you were colorblind or that you don't see differences, and that E.T. was sort of a film that fit that time period. But he said, the world has changed so much in those 40 years that a film that really at its core is saying two people from two separate worlds, from two separate experiences, can come together and be friends and develop a relationship despite their differences. Some people might connect with that, but then some people might see it as too Pollyanna, too pie in the sky, not really reflective of our current world. And I just thought that was so striking, that would be his take on the film, but also just such an interesting point. And just to wrap up with what he said on this point, he said, he thinks that's part of the reason why E.T. still resonates with so many people is because it's very contemporary to 1982. It's not just a contemporary or timeless film, but it's also set in a time where that relationship between E.T. and Elliot could happen. And that when you go back and watch it, it's almost, longing for that time that maybe has passed us by a little bit.
That is pretty powerful, and you're right. It is a total reflection on the times. I was 9-10 years old at the time, so it's interesting now with having a son who's almost 9 to kind of see even where his perception is on the taking of the world, and just to now to be able to look back and reflect on this. It does. You're right. It's a real eye opener to where we were then and where we are now. So you actually had a chance to go to, I guess, the Drew Barrymore show, and you got to meet Drew, and I know she did the foreword for this. And did you get to meet the other cast members? Was that part of the anniversary date?
I did, yes. It was part of the anniversary show, and so I got to go to the taping. I'd spoken with Drew, and she obviously, as you said, contributed to the book, but I got to meet her in person, and she is every bit what you'd hope and expect her to be based on just seeing her in interviews and seeing her on TV. And in fact, Drew was the very first person that I got to see the book. And I don't mean from the cast, I mean of anyone, because when when we were able to connect, the book was almost fully laid out, actually. The text was still, being moved around, but in terms of the photos and the layout and the design. And so when she and I spoke, she actually was looking through and paging through a PDF of the book. And to hear her say, "Oh my God, I haven't seen that picture before. Oh, this takes me back to filming at the house. Oh my God, E.T.'s dying." I mean, to hear her, do the Drew Barrymore thing, be Drew Barrymore and have that, all of her emotions are right on the surface, right? So to have her have this reaction to seeing the book and to reliving her childhood, I think as she writes in the foreword, thumbing through this book for her was like being back on the set. And that was one of the things that we really wanted to create for everyone who wasn't there. Like myself, I wasn't there either, but we wanted to take everyone through the process of the germ of the idea, pre-production, sketches, filming, the merchandise, some of the items that are on your desk. We wanted to take everyone on the full ride of ET, and so to hear Henry Thomas, Dee Wallace, Rob McNaughton, Matt Demerit, who is inside one of the ET bodysuits, to be able to speak with them over the course of the last couple of weeks, and not just them, but also people at ILM. that some of them actually, it's funny because when you think about all of the things that ILM had worked on before ET and then after ET, when you think about the actual effects of ET, a lot of the guys at ILM sort of were like, well, this was a small film. It was an easy film. It wasn't a big, I didn't have to make a DeLorean disappear. I didn't have to make, a Death Star blow up, all these sorts of things. But they sort of, I think, had newfound appreciation for their own work on this film as well. So it's nice. It's nice to be able to give this book to the fans, but it's also nice to be able to give this, I kind of call it like a yearbook almost. Like if you worked on the film, this is your like your record of high school. This is your record of being on this project.
I wanted to ask because it is really ridiculously packed with so many different cool pictures and diagrams and the I saw look like scripts and call sheets. How do you acquire all of those things to be added? Were those from Universal? Were they from people that you met along the way who said, "Hey, I got this in my drawer, or I've saved"? How did you acquire all those? Because they're really neat.
It was a little bit of everything. Some of it was from Amblin and Universal. Some of it was, this is the sixth book I've written. So, over time, I've developed some great relationships with some great collectors that had this and had that, and were able to let us scan things. There are a number of pictures and production notes that actually come from like a technical coordinator on the film. There were very few people that were authorized to even have cameras on the set, of course. I mean, this was the utmost secrecy.
Right.
So there are some Polaroids that are in the book that are from a gentleman by the name of Mitch Suskin, who actually was one of these people who was authorized to take pictures because he was a liaison between Carlo Rambaldi's workshop and Stephen and Kathy Kennedy. And so his job was to this is what ET is looking like in production, and then show it to Stephen, and Stephen would give notes when he wasn't able to come in to the workshop. So he had tons of Polaroids, and we just were able to scan some. There's actually 2 pictures in the book of Matt Demerit, who was in the ET, one of the ET suits, a person who was born without legs, and so he walked on his hands. And so when you see ET walking, that's almost always Matt, the ET that drinks the beer, the ET that falls over, that gets hit with the refrigerator door. All that's Matt. And there are 2 pictures in the book of the very first time Matt was in an ET suit just as a test. And those 2 pictures were actually taken by Steven Spielberg himself. And he said, I've held on to these pictures. No one's seen them. It was such an important day for the film. You have to put them in the book. And so, when Mr. Spielberg says you have to put them in the book, they, you move everything and they go in the book. But just to say, everyone was so happy to contribute. Some of the things did come from cast members. It was really a group project. And I think everyone knew this was sort of our chance to tell the definitive story of ET. There have been other books that had come out before, but some of them were annotated screenplays. Some of them were kind of like just interviews. Some of them were photo heavy. Some of them were, much closer to the time of the film's release. So you didn't sort of have that perspective of time. But, everyone felt like if you're going to do a book on ET, you got to pull out all the stops. And so it's a big book, but it's a jam-packed book.
It is. Now, I mean, with the cultural impact that E.T. had for toys and with candy and with music and merchandise, and recently with all the, things like Beetlejuice and Heathers and Back to the Future coming to Broadway, do you think maybe we can get an E.T. musical at some point? I mean, how fun would that be?
Look, I love Broadway. You're speaking my language. Believe it or not,
we know Bob Gale, so I mean,
We do know Bob Gale. In fact, I had to call Bob Gale for a very important question, actually. So Bob Gale actually jumped in and helped out with this too. But that's such a great question because I think there's a lot of mediums where I don't think E.T. would work, like as a sequel. There was a novelization
Book of the
sequel
Green Planet.
that was very right. That was a very different sort of direction from the first film. There's obviously the E.T. Adventure Ride, which is,
Right.
sort of based on the Book of the Green Planet. But I actually think a musical, especially, I mean, look, if John Williams' score is going to be a part of it,
And Neil Diamond, turn on your heart light. That's
right?
something to start with right there.
Turn on your heart lights, let it shine wherever you go.
I'll say this: will it ever happen? I don't know. If it happens, I'd love to see it. Actually, so I wouldn't want to see a sequel, but a musical, I think I'd love to see.
Yeah, you saw the TV commercial they did a few years back, right? Where E.T.
Of course,
returned.
it's written about in the book. Believe it or not, when I say it's everything, it's everything. So yeah,
That was fun.
Yeah, that TV commercial was kind of interesting, and it's so funny because the book was I had written several drafts already. It was being worked through, and I'm just watching the parade, and this commercial comes on, and I'm like, what? What? Like that? It was it was like it was unbelievable. It was an unbelievable moment, and then I went and I interviewed the people that worked on the commercial. How do they recreate the ET puppet? What was different? So there's probably like a good half a chapter about just the commercial, because we really wanted it to be a full 40-year adventure, everything ET. So yeah, so that darn commercial opened the book back up for me and made me have to write a little bit more, but it was worth it in the end.
Nice. I don't want to keep you. I know you've got to get back to a meeting, but let's do the quick plug here. Inside Editions. Where can people get the book if they want to? What's the best places?
Sure. So E.T., the Extraterrestrial, the Ultimate Visual History is available wherever books are sold. Support your local bookseller, but you can pick it up wherever. It's everywhere. And if your local bookseller doesn't have it, go and demand it, because they should be able to get it.
Nice. And what's next for you? What can you give a hint on what you're writing next?
Ooh, well, you know what? I love living in that 1980s space. I'm always working, and so I've got something a little bit different for me, but I think if you enjoyed my other books, you'll enjoy what I have coming up next.
Nice.
How's that for a tease?
I do. I hope it's Goonies.
Ooh, maybe.
That would be my next one. Caseen, thank you so much for joining us today, and I still have a lot of this book left to read, and some of it I actually reread because it was just so cool, and I'm excited to share this book as well as just all the things that it's crammed full with my family, because we love the movie, and again, just having moved from Tahunga, California, to Connecticut, which we're not too far. We're almost neighbors.
Right.
So we'll get together for lunch. But I'm excited to share this with them, and I know everybody who's an ET fan are just going to love it. So thank you so much for joining us, and we will chat with you later. We'll chat with you on the next book, whatever it may be.
Awesome. Sounds great. Thank you so much.
You got it, man. Take care.
You too.